is not that every word in this one is important, but that the whole flow of this one is important. So let's just go through it one time, and I'll try to read and highlight what I'd like to highlight out of this. This is the end of the book of Joshua. Joshua begins with Moses is now dead, and it's time to move into the promised land. They align themselves and start marching in. There's a lot of, I don't want to do that, they're bigger than we are, I don't know whether we could go, and Joshua kept leading forward and leading and leading. Of course, the Battle of Jericho is in there and all the other conquests of the land. So this is it. This is, the land has been, the conquest is complete, so to speak, and he's gathered everyone together. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, and some of the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel. And they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, God of Israel, long ago your ancestors, Terah and his sons, Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates and served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan, and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I gave Esau to the hill country of Seir to possess, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in its midst, and afterwards I brought you out. Then I brought your ancestors out of Egypt. You came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your ancestors with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. When they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and made the sea come upon them and cover them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt. Afterwards you lived in the wilderness a long time. Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived on the other side of the Jordan. They fought with you, and I handed them over to you. And you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then King Balak, son of Zippor of Moab, set out to fight against Israel. He sent and invited Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you. But I would not listen to Balaam. Therefore he blessed you. So I rescued you out of his hand. When you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho, the citizens of Jericho fought against you, and also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I handed them over to you. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove out before you the two kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword or your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, the towns that you had not built, and you lived in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive yards that you did not plant. Now, therefore, revere the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your ancestors served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Now, if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors who served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. But maybe some of that may be familiar to you. Was there something new that jumped out at you?
I'd say just all the preface. That's a very familiar line. That one verse. Mm-hmm. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. But all that, I had forgotten all that prep and lead up.
Yeah, this is the big tent meeting, and it goes on from here, and they all commit, of course. Anyone else see something new in this one?
What struck me was that I gave you the land on which you had not labored, the towns that you had not built, and you live in them, and you eat the fruits and vineyards and olive yards that you did not plant. And that just kind of like, it's jogging something from my memory. Maybe some of the earlier prophets saying that this was going to be, what was to pass, what shall pass. And now it has passed.
Yeah, this is when it first happened, and the prophets echo this.
Okay.
So, but you have that right. That is a phrase that shows up again and again. And it's a way of saying, you didn't do that, God did that for you. And we've even heard echoes of that recently in the last presidential election.
No, I built this business.
Yeah, right, right. It's the exact same line. Just redressed a little bit, repurposed. So this is a lesson on healthy group culture. Why the heck did I pick this one?
Well, one angle might be institutional memory. Who are we and where did we come from?
What would you call that section, from verse 3 through, the main paragraph there? What would you call that? We say, that's the story. We bind ourselves together with culture by stories. George Washington did what with a piece of money?
Supposedly threw it across the river,
He did what with an axe?
chopped down a cherry tree.
Or maybe he didn't, but yeah, he
But
had.
he never told a lie.
He had an axe with sap all over it. There was a tree on its side. Hard to tell. We have these stories. They bind us together more powerfully than anything else. So the healthy group culture was evidenced by Joshua's speech here, or by the author's recounting of this incident, saying that we all told the same story, all lived by the same story. And that obviously is something we need to be cultivating as leaders within our group. What are the stories about our ministries that need to go on? How do we honor the ones that came before us, the vineyards we did not plant, with their stories, so that can become part of the culture of the Kirk? So, let us open with prayer. Oh God, may we be always grateful that there are places we did not build, things we did not do, but opportunities to use them to be in your service. Amen. All right. So, first 4 lessons were predominantly about you as a leader, and the introduction to those things that you as a leader should be paying attention to. The next set of chapters will talk about healthy group culture, or now going above the individual line of leadership and into the group line of leadership. Tom and I were chatting beforehand and had some great examples of exactly the kind of situations that you confront in your work or your home or your neighborhood or your ministry team. And I thought it would be just fun to spend a minute or two, no more, saying, do you understand the culture of any group you're a part of, be it at home or at work or whatever? And can you identify with some simple words what kind of culture that group has?
Well, I'm new where I'm working now, but I've picked up on this very quickly. I can't say I fully understand it yet. There's a teacher culture, because the organization I work for is overwhelmingly retired teachers with some administrators and people like cafeteria workers and janitors thrown in. But there's a teacher culture, and it is didactic. People use their teacher voice in meetings. They use teacher techniques when they talk. And it's very interesting to pick up on that. I trained to be a school teacher years ago, met all the requirements to get certified and never taught. But some of the things I learned all those years back are coming back to me, because this is how these folks live. This is how they conduct themselves.
Mm-hmm. Very good. That's exactly what I was looking for. Others, are you aware of the groups you're in and the cultures they exhibit? It's a hard question to answer.
Mine are very family oriented, because it's mostly moms with kids in playgroups and things like that, so, I mean, those are the people I come in contact with. They're very much concerned about, the welfare of their family, the well-being of their family.
And that would evidence in behavioral things that anything having to do with the family would become things, would become higher priority than things that don't have to do with that family part of the culture. Is that fair?
Yeah, and a lot about educating yourself too. I mean, kindergarten, people who are coming into the Wake County school system for the first time, and it's an education process. And then people try to educate themselves about, child behavior and nutrition and, all these things that you may never have thought about until, you have this little, 4 or 5-year-old running around in front of you, and you think to yourself, oh, I better get on the ball here.
I'm just looking ahead at the lesson, the stages of group dynamics, and it's very familiar to me. I hadn't heard these specific headings: pseudo-community, chaos, surrender, emptying, and true community. And that's really the stages of leadership developing within a group. I've heard it as forming, storming, norming, and performing.
Yeah.
In terms of project management, where the group comes together, everybody's nice, then you kind of get to know each other, and you have this sort of elbowing and jostling of who's going to kind of be the dominant personality, or what's going to happen, or your disagreement over the overall direction of the group, and then you kind of norm, and that's the chaos part, and then you kind of norm down to, okay, we'll sort of resolve this so that you can get on to true community and performing and moving ahead.
That's it. To go back to groups you're involved in, their culture.
Right.
I only talk about culture. I'm not talking about classification.
Exactly.
What's the culture? And it has nothing to do with those categories. So, I'm in a group at work, and the culture of the group is in tension around a majority of risk averse and a small minority of risk tolerant. So the culture is about risk. It's not about the categories you just named. So I want you to understand the culture is about the story. That is, what is it that they would say is their personal story? Our ancestors came from. It has nothing to do with how they operate together. It's about the culture. So the leader has an opportunity, and that is to shape the culture without dominating the culture. It is to use the cultural characteristics to guide the group toward a destination. So even though each group will have its own culture, personality, they're formed together for some kind of mission. And how do you guide them through the 4 stages, as John was describing, using that culture as the asset. And when it gets off kilter, as it could, how do you guide it back toward a more healthy position to be helping on the mission of the ministry team? So Tom, you had that example of one personality dominating, and the culture of that group, as I heard you say, is they tolerate that much from that person, but they won't tolerate any more. And at that point, there's another dynamic that takes over in that group culture, and that is you're allowed to turn down the screws on that person. Is that a good representation of what you're saying?
I think that's basically it.
So that's the culture. That's not about how it performs, but just how it acts. And I want to use the next set, which is get to know each person, create regular time. Those 5 attributes there. Let's think about getting to know each person in the group, and I'm going to use the example to get us started of what did Jesus do? So when Jesus was getting to know the disciples, did he take time to learn about them as individuals?
Well, it seems that he knew them.
Correct. means he probably did have time to learn them as individuals.
Yes. And when he called them, it seems pretty clear he knew who he was calling.
So,
Whether that was divine knowledge or whether it was some other kind of knowledge he had, he had it. He knew his people.
so he's sitting by the lakeside, and the way Mark writes the gospel, there's no time for anything but action. So in Mark's gospel, you hear, Jesus walked up and said, Peter, Andrew, go. Let's go. Time to meet. Most likely he sat by the lakeside for a while, and he observed the teams, because there's some evidence that said they were frustrated about fishing all night, and he was going to solve that problem. But he wouldn't solve it with just anybody. He was going to solve it with some specific individuals. So he took time to understand who they were as part of the group. Now, the way we use the technique we use in ministry teams to understand the group is the word share prayer and time for sharing around the table. If we had a longer session, like in an evening, we'd probably have another half hour of individual sharing so that we would have time to get to know each other better at a deeper level. Quite often we hear in our culture, there's never time to get to know someone because we are so action-oriented. And so I try to balance the learning with the understanding of each person in class as an individual. And then there's the other part, and that is that as a leader, you do have to have some perspective and get to help the people learn who they are from the leader's point of view. So you can say, George, every time you go into that rant, this is what happens to our group. And I would prefer that your contributions be channeled positively than people react negatively against you. Perhaps we could try this. So to take that instance and try to flip it from a negative behavior to a contributory behavior. Most likely this is someone who's a well-formed personality and is not likely to change that stripe instantly, but that would be the kind of example of a leader's job. When there is a new group, there's more chance to shape it as a leader than with you have an established group that you're walking into as you are. But get to know each person in the group. Number 2, I think, is the hardest one to do. Create regular time and space to talk openly about group culture. How are we relating to one another? Not how are we performing, but how are we relating to one another? Did Jesus do any of that?
I think he did. It's just you have to look at it through that lens, the lens of is Jesus as group leader and group dynamic advisor, if you will, to really be able to discern that.
Yeah, it's a great crystallizing incident here. Mary and Martha.
Right.
Group culture.
Right.
Talking openly about group culture. The group culture was, we value this more than we value that. We value relationship more than getting things done on time. Don't know that, carry that way too far, but to put balance on the getting things done on time and more balance on relationship, there's the Mary and Martha story. Quite often you'd hear 2 things. Jesus stepping aside by himself to develop his relationship with God, just to pray, and then second, calling the disciples aside to explain things to them. So part of the group culture was helping them. So he also did a real interesting piece of, I would say, self-love, or a tough love about getting that self-understanding better. And when he sent the 70 out, take nothing with you, come back, you'll understand me better. And you'll understand yourselves better, and you'll cooperate better. So sometimes a challenge comes in there to help understand that group culture.
What was that book from? What book of the Bible was that? actually from enough.
Mary and Martha is
No, the
from-
Mary and Martha, I understand, the
The 70
70.
is in 2 Gospels. I want to say it is in both Luke and Matthew. I don't think it's in Mark.
Okay,
I didn't look up the cross references, but you'll find an actual title, Sending of the 70,
okay.
in one of those. It'll be easy to find as you flip through. There is also another place where we learn about biblical group culture. And that's the early part of Acts. There's the original Kirk cookbook. Who knows the title of the original Kirk cookbook?
Sylvia does.
No, I can remember, I have it.
It comes from Acts 2. With glad and generous hearts.
Yeah.
So it describes the commune behavior of the early Christians, and they brought everything with glad and generous hearts. That's the stewardship part of it. You follow that along a little bit, and by Acts 5 or 6, there's someone who violates the group culture and covenant by withholding something, and they are struck dead. That's pretty strong culture. A very interesting idea about talking about group culture. So if you look at the early part of Acts, you'll see that they were developing that group culture, and clearly they must have been talking about that. Number 3, lead the group in a process of identifying core values and remind them often. And that could be somewhat around the mission statement. Our core value is that our ministry team provides Christian education to children. Let's not ever forget what we're about is the children. We're not about orderliness. We're not about the right color drapery hiding the supplies. We're about the children. So you just keep coming back to that to help you stay focused and stay on the core values. And again, the Acts passages really help people understand that. What are we going to do now that we're being persecuted? We're going to go every day to the marketplace and preach. That's our core value. We're here to do that thing. Everything else can't get in the way. I've got to go out and I've got to spread the message. So keep that from getting in the way. The things that usually get in the way of that are personal agendas. And obviously, in our ministry team environment, there are legitimate personal agendas. I've got to take care of a child. I've got to take care of obligations I have to my community. We're balancing that, and the early church didn't have any of that balance. It was way over to one side. Help the group become clear on its purpose. It goes back to that notion of mission. And the one I thought of for this in Jesus' ministry that was really telling is he said, "Come on, boys, we're going to Jerusalem." And they said, "Oh boy, we're going to Jerusalem. I'm going to New York City." "And we're going to celebrate the Messiahship." I got it right. We're going to have to celebrate the way I thought. So there was the conflict of values, the conflict of cultures, the conflict of mission, all embodied in that one thing. Let's get clear about our purpose. We're going to Jerusalem. We're going to put on a fellowship dinner. We're going to have a Kirkwine event. It's very easy to see how everyone's agendas can get involved in that, and how as a leader you have to keep everybody focused on what it is they're trying to do through that. And to live out that idea of why the group is together by keeping focus on the primary mission. You can have certainly other agendas. You know, I want everyone to have a good meal and be entertained by good singing. You can have an and, but generally speaking, you're going to be focused on what is the primary mission of what we're about, so that we can keep them focused on what it is that can be done with the gifts they bring to the table. And then lastly, affirm behavior that contributes to a healthy and desired dynamic. The biblical example I came up with, and I'm sure there are many more, but I got fixated on this one and I stopped thinking. was foot washing. This is who we are, and I want to affirm who we are by saying to you, Peter, unless you do this, then you're not part of the group. That is affirming the group behavior. It's also, in the sense of this last bullet, is let's make sure that we are encouraging people when they do the right cultural or mission things, and give them that little bit of feedback. It doesn't take much. I'm on a board, and the leader of the group gives out every so often a squeaky toy of glory, a $1.29 dog toy that goes squeak, squeak, squeak when you compress it, right? That is affirming behavior and recognizing people, and really, kind of uplifting the group because it's fun, but also someone gets recognized, and not so serious that they could get too elevated in their own eyes or in somebody else's eyes, just affirming a behavior. And you can do it with throw out Hershey's Kisses, or all kinds of little tiny things that affirm the behavior in simple ways. What we find in the corporate culture, when we talk about awards, that the biggest boost you get for employee behavior is peer recognition. It is not money. So you can give somebody a dollar award in private, or give them a squeaky toy of glory in public, and that one matters more than the money in almost every case. The money has to get pretty serious before it matters more. But usually that doesn't encourage future behavior nearly so much as peer recognition. So keep thinking about your groups and recognizing the peer relationships and elevating everyone, not just one person over and over again. Questions on those 5? So let's do just a short journaling, if you have not done it, by taking notes on the 2 questions there in the bottom. What activities challenge you most, and what resources might you need? And then I'd like to hear back from you what resources you might need to help us help you. Anyone have a resource request?
The 36-hour day.
Yeah.
And let's all pray now that God will expand the space-time continuum so that we can fit all this in, so that we can create regular time and space to do nice things like talk openly about
You
ourselves.
just increase your workday.
Right.
That's what the 36-hour day is about. Isn't there a book called The 36-Hour Day? I think there is, John, and it may be very an instructive
Yeah.
piece of literature.
But really, yeah, I use that phrase all the time for that very reason.
Mm-hmm. So time management resources, and obviously not 450-page time management resources. 10-page time management resources.
Detailed, flowery prose.
Yeah. My publisher said I needed 400 pages, therefore the book is 400 pages long.
I have a question about item 2. That would probably be the biggest challenge of those 5 for me, although I can see challenges in every area. But, okay, we have what I would call a staff meeting. We established that, because to my knowledge, where I'm working, and there's a grand total of 4 of us in the office, and at the end of the month it'll be 3, me and 2. we don't have staff meetings. We're going to, at the end of the month, we're going to start. I'm gonna do that. But I guess I would say, talking openly about group culture, after I affirm that our mission there is to serve the members, and after I praise them because I've already learned from some of the officers and from the rank and file folk that our two current staff members have a good reputation on the telephone. That's how they have most of their interaction with the members. Somebody calls, they've got a question, they've got a problem, and these two ladies help deal with it. Sometimes it would come to me, but not all the time. And they have a good reputation. They're getting courteous service. So I guess I'd want to affirm that in these staff meetings, in addition to talking about just general stuff. Who's going to be here this week on what hours, and et cetera, and so forth. We're there to serve the members. I will share with them what I heard at the board meeting, that their good work has been noted and appreciated by the officers. I'm thinking that would help build group culture.
Certainly would. I would, in your case, and it would apply also to ministry teams, reverse it and have them give you the input rather than you always being the source of the input. What is it that would make your job easier? What is it that would make the lives of the members easier? What is it that, so they've got the customer service part down, now it's the next edge, which is how do you get the content better? How do you improve in general? And we recommend to ministry teams that some number of times a year, at least once, you have a mini retreat where you think about things like that. So you can do that with a small group. You can be really flexible and carve out time to do that when the phone load is light, or whatever it is in a month, and generate out of that a set of initiatives that will excite these folks who've been doing the same sort of thing over and over again. I always try to take a group and compress something and say, what would you do differently if every phone call had to be answered in 30 seconds? Or less. Because 30 seconds is a long time to say, I think the solution is. What would you do if you had to do it in 5 seconds? And they would start to give you ideas that are really creative around doing it in the normal flow of business. So, how would I do set up and take down of a fellowship event in 5 minutes? Could make a game out of it. Well, obviously more people, but let's make a game out of it. Let's have teams and compete, have squeaky toy of glory, and all of a sudden somebody say 5 minutes I'll spend, especially if we're gonna have some fun, rather than a half hour when it's just getting work done. So those retreats that you have, they can just be done in the context of a committee meeting, or where you get the creative sparks from your people through your leadership. So you don't have answers, you only have questions. And you take that culture, understand it, figure out where you want to mold it and shape it to have that behavior of the culture help the team in its performance ranking. Is that useful?
Yes.
And just rely on experience and what has worked for me. Other resources you might need before we get to the next piece. To good time management, perhaps even a spiritual time management, if I can find something. I'll post that on the website. So as John said earlier, the corporate culture knows the 4 steps as forming, norming, storming, and performing. And I have been through that regimen as well. And it's a fabulous regimen. It really is insightful. And they're great handles. But there's a slight difference in Scott Peck's taxonomy, where he talks about pseudo-community, that's the forming. Chaos, notice there's no norming. It goes right to storming. So he left out the norming, that's up in pseudo-community. Then it goes into a more spiritual dimension. So rather than performing, you get to surrendering, emptying, and then lastly, to true community. And he observes in his material that people will go in and out of these stages. They won't stay in any one stage necessarily forever. And as a leader, your job is to do two things along these lines. One is to recognize when folks are stuck in pseudo-community and to figure out ways to get them to move to the next part, which is where they're being honest with each other, and there is some bit of chaos that results from the honesty of opinion. Yes, Liz?
Are these stages of that individuals go through or that organizations go through?
These are group behaviors,
Okay.
group stages. Yes, thank you for clarifying. So, pseudo-community is we've just met and everybody's nice, and we all bring cupcakes and so on. But you don't talk about anything difficult. And so as a leader, sometimes you're going to have to recognize when you've been in that stage too long, and it's time to sort of do a little push to move them to the next stage, which is where they're not just guided by that social norms and conventions, but being guided and being true to their understanding of the ministry. And there's going to be discussion, because everyone's opinion won't be the same. And I don't know whether you've experienced that in the Earth Care Committee, because you have a couple strong personalities there who would likely enjoy the chaotic notion of what goes on and argue it out, right? Do you observe any of that?
I don't really attend those meetings, but in the garden committee and talking to individual people, I do hear different, we should do it this way, and then another, no, we should do it this way, and I think there's some things we're still figuring out in that regard, and different opinions.
Yeah, and always will be figuring out.
Yeah.
So the hard part of chaos is not to let personalities, individuals feel damaged by the chaos. You want to make sure that people in the chaos know that it's generative, not destructive. So you want to generate
It
ideas out of
seems
it.
like that would be a good, I don't know what the word is, but a good way of turning that into brainstorming.
Yes.
Turn that into brainstorming instead of conflicting ideas.
Yeah, and figure out ways, because there are times when there are people who are very, very true to their opinion on the way things ought to be done, and they're not in line with others, and it can be turned into a personal confrontation. So you've left the group level, you've left the discussion about what needs to be done, you're now into person-to-person confrontation, and we will deal with that later. So your job as a leader is to always make sure you're dealing with the substance as substance, not personality, and that you're finding ways to get creative out of it, not just to get to a decision so we can move on. But sometimes those two polar opposites that are arguing, the real answer for the group is somewhere in between where they both compromise. And everyone sees a higher value in that compromise rather than a narrow value and a narrow value, which is often the case when you have people arguing like crazy, is they put up boundaries around things, and you want to break those boundaries so you can find something that affirms both.
Sounds like our government.
Yeah, which is where we're still in the polar opposite at the moment. It's very true.
I just wanted, it occurred to me as I'm looking at this, that one of the things that you need to do too is to understand what is the mission of the group. So if the mission of the group is to get something done, then there's a different dynamic than if the mission of the group is, for instance, just to have community and receive input so that others who maybe have the mission of getting something done can have that understanding of the group culture and the group dynamic.
Yeah, I think in general, we all have, in ministry teams, we all have something to get done. And the question is whether I'm in a ministry team meeting where I'm discussing what ought to be done, or at the time of the water is boiling, the spaghetti has to go in, because we have to serve dinner in 15 minutes, and that goes back to the situational leadership notion. In this phase where I'm in the ministry team meeting, I want to be the leader that has thought and is talking about group culture and so on. When I'm with the water boiling and people pounding on the table with their knives and forks, I want to be a more directive kind of leader at that point. And folks appreciate that, right? And they'll understand the two styles are situational, almost naturally, because they've seen it on TV and movies in their real life as well. But yeah, good point, John. And it's hard when folks believe that the work they're doing is the only thing, rather than a piece of the thing. A piece of the thing is relationship. That's what we're trying to affirm right now, not getting stuff done, which we know how to do.
And in terms of the situational leadership style evolution, what I've seen in our lifetimes, for instance, government example, military example, is that the military has recognized, especially in the volunteer force, that two types of leadership style, where when you're in a peaceful situation, an organizing situation, you take input. It's not just all directive coming from the top, and there's that tacit understanding by the leaders that, okay, but when we get in the battle, I'm the general, I'm the lieutenant, you're the sergeant, you do what I say because I took your input prior to that. And that's, I think, is a real helpful, as you were saying, in any situation.
So we know the hallmarks of group one, stage one, and that is everyone's getting along nicely. We know the hallmarks of stage two, where there's some chaos, because we've seen that a lot. What are the hallmarks of stage three, the surrendering, emptying? How do you know when you're there?
You're finally productive. So you're finally productive.
You're finally productive. Very good. How are you productive differently than stage two?
I think stage two, from this description, you really kind of have people who are not really working against each other, but have their own, specific ideas of how things are done. Whereas by stage three, I think that they've come to a compromise and we've just decided on a way to do it. Like, we're all gonna do it this way.
One of the hallmarks I was thinking of is that you don't need to ask. Something just gets done. So in some ways, I think in the community garden, there are a lot of things that just get done because there are some number of people in the community garden who are in the surrendering, emptying phase. So I'll say rich, I don't know whether it is rich, but seems to say that, I'm driven to do this. This is where I am. This is how I express myself almost. That's your surrendering, emptying. But that's somewhat on an individual level, where Rich will drag people along, or Kevin will drag people along, or Beth will drag people along. But it's not everyone all together now, 1, 2, 3. And that's the true community phase. How is it that we can have, and it's going to be a small group, that really is functioning in a true community, and it's likely to happen only for short periods of time under unusual circumstances. I don't want to get you to believe that if you just lead really well, that you're going to get there. In fact, you're going to get there and come back. And I had one example that might help crystallize this. This is 7 acres of carry that we sit on. You didn't know it was that big, huh? 7 acres, and that's up. Imagine what that's worth. 7 acres of carry. Some time ago, a number of people who could fit in this room comfortably decided they would commit to buy those 7 acres and the building that sat thereupon. And they would find some way to make that work. Part of our story, part of that culture, that we're all in it together, and part of their true community. Now, what happened? If you want to tell that story like you tell the story of the Israelites from Abraham forward, they were successful. They did grow and multiply. They went back from true community, and as you get to certain sizes, you go down into stage 1, everybody being nice together, and the occasional, we're going to have a capital campaign. We're into stage 2, we're going to argue about what we're doing. And then we all agree, out of that chaos, we jump up to stage 3, the project gets done, and all the excitement goes down, we jump back into stage 1. So we're telling the Kirk story, we're back in stage 1 again. How do we get to stage 2 and stage 3, so on? even though it's always temporary. And part of the role of the leader is to be as exciting about your mission as it was for those first 20 families who, I think it was 20, got up there and made the commitment to buy the 7 acres of land at that outrageous price to them at that time, and say, you know, God will provide, this will live, and we will prosper. And that is where I will end today, partially because, other than the journaling questions, there's not anything else in the lesson to cover. So that would be the logical end. What did I leave uncovered in your mind today?
I cannot think of any glaring omissions.
Hey, can you just quickly tell me where the true community of stage 4 separates from stage 1? Because they sound like they're very similar.
Very good. Good observation. I hadn't thought about that before, Pat, but that makes perfect sense. In stage 1, you're nice to each other, and it's he calls it a pseudo-community. It's not genuine. It is not born out of any shared group experience, any discomfort, any chaos, to use his language, but rather it is just surface. And the true community may get to that same bit of good feeling, but when it gets to that bit of good feeling, it's functioning as, you go back to the Acts passage. They shared everything together and they gave with glad and generous hearts. Not, they found a way to fulfill the budget. Right? Stage 1 is, we got our budget stuff covered. Stage 4 is glad and generous hearts.
Okay.
It comes organically out of the community, rather than superficial.
It's like it's a deeper.
Much
It's a
deeper,
deeper.
much deeper.
Kind of like the
Good
family
question.
reunion versus the family night dinner.
Versus,
Yeah.
well,
I mean,
the
You have a
type,
family reunion, everybody's nice, oh, how you doing?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
nice.
and the deep family special dinner on Thanksgiving.
It's a little different.
And the journaling
Not
part,
exactly like that, but it's,
very quick comment, the journaling part, it occurred to me, in the present context organizationally, leaders and then the prophets, it occurred to me, a leader is a leader. A prophet is a facilitator. A prophet, and this, I appreciate what others think, the role in the community building, a leader is trying to drive the group to a certain place. The facilitator is there to let the group dynamics happen.
Yeah.
And so very often, the leader, you have to decide, are you the leader and the facilitator, or are you just the leader, and then you need somebody else to facilitate?
You may need both, yeah.
And I come to the belief that if at all possible, you absolutely need both.
Yeah, very much so. And good observation. This is very, very complicated stuff that we've covered in an incredibly short time. The depth that one can go and study. But we did off Scott Peck's book, and I'll make sure that link is available in the community for those who want to Amazon it. Can I make that a word, a verb? Amazon it. Those who,
That's like Google it,
yeah.
yeah,
Why not?
who want to order the book in their preferred fashion.
Yes.
Mark that real quick before it gets out.
All right, have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
We leave.
Leave everything. We have a license to be, to